Hi there. Today we're going to discuss a whole bunch of things in our Artist Masterclass relating to audio. So this week, unlike previous weeks, I've actually put together a test scene ahead of recording this video, so hopefully this one's a bit more up to speed and we can get through a few more things because there's quite a lot of ground to cover today. So today what we're going to do is I've actually put together a club region, and I did this on Sunday afternoon, but you can take a look through here. It's fairly basic. We've used a couple of things from the asset store. Author named Creepy Cat authored most of the building materials, the vines and things that we've added here. Actually using something called Ivy Generator, which is a tool on the asset store for planting vine style assets. And we've mixed those in with a couple of other small little sci-fi packs and things just to build out this space. Now this space, when we're done with it today, I'm actually going to open it up as a room template, so people who are using the in-world room customizer can build regions looking like this. In fact, if I tab over to my viewer, I've actually got a copy of the region in here already, which you can see is actually quite pretty. One of the things that we'll get started here is on lighting. So we've already covered lighting to a degree in previous tutorials, but this region is a particularly good showcase for how we can make lighting look good in Science Space. So we've actually tried to use every single bit of the lighting toolkit within this region. So we've actually used a combination of, let me just get back out of that. So we've used a combination of mixed lighting, which is the pre-computed one that we recommended. We've also used the pre-computed runtime lighting. Now, when we covered lighting on our previous tutorial, we actually indicated on the pre-computed runtime lighting that it's not usually something you want to use. You use it if light sources in the scene are likely to change dramatically. And for this particular scene, that is going to be the case. We are going to experiment today with having visualizers, all kinds of lighting effects going on in here. And I can actually show you that with the in-world build tools though, before we get down to that point. So what I'll do is I'll just go out here, edit the room. So this is using the floor plan editor that we had a couple of months ago. So this is our inside our viewer rather than inside Unity. I'm just going to grab a light. Now, Lex for Art, who's one of our creators, has built a great little set of futuristic lights which are now in the store. So I'm just using one of those here. And you can see here that when we actually place the lighting, it does actually bounce and reflect off things, and it'll actually refine. It'll refine fairly quickly, so it's not really a great a great demo scene because you can't really see the update times. But what we are getting is we're actually getting global illumination in here. That is updating in real time. It's quite a clever little bit of technology in Unity called Enlighten by a company called Geomerics, and you can sort of see the impacts and the results here. One of the things you'll notice is that we've got lots of things like baked reflections all over the place, as well as we've got real-time reflections. We actually have both. We have nice sort of soft, diffuse, rounded out global illumination lighting. And you don't have to burn a whole lot of file size budget in order to do this. This scene is currently about 90 megabytes of size, which fits within our free plans and gives you some room left over for furniture. That said, I have not optimized this at all. We're using 4096 textures on most surfaces in here. It's all using atlases and a few other things which are not quite so as efficient. Nonetheless, it does look fairly pretty. It's using off a lot of the effects. So we're actually going to go into Unity and we're going to get started with playing with the scene. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to close out of the viewer and go into here. So this is our scene. I'm just going to turn on the camera because that's got our post behavior on it, so we can just preview how post effects look. So this is obviously how it looks in world. So we've got a fairly accurate preview setup. And I'm just going to walk through a couple of the components and then we can actually get into the nitty-gritty bits of today's topic, which is really all about audio. Audio is obviously a fairly fundamental aspect of building rich, immersive virtual worlds, and not a lot of people have actually sort of been playing with it much in virtual worlds in the past. We've got a fantastic audio toolkit, and I'm really hoping that we'll get to be able to cover at least most of it today. We've got a whole bunch of extensions we've built on top of Unity as well for making things like music visualizers. If you've been to the Guitar Halo region, the music visualizer in there is actually built using all these components, and not even using our scripting. There is scripting interfaces to the audio analyzing subsystem, so you can actually build scripted objects that interface with whatever you want that's pulling off the audio stream, to actually give you access to the spectrum data that you can read inside your scripts. So, basics of this region, it's fairly straightforward. If we switch off lighting, we switch off all of our image effects, we just go down to the basics. So you can see there's a few things in here. First, we've got reflections coming in. That's coming through reflection probes. And you can notice that these guys, it's probably easier to see with lighting on, in fact. If I go into the edit mode, you can actually sort of see the bounds of that reflection probe. So we've actually got about 12 reflection probes in here, I think. Yes, 11. 11 reflection probes, which are scattered all over the place. You can see we've sort of covered out the whole volume. Now, we've blocked out those reflection probes, so each room has roughly got its own reflection probe. And the reason for that is we don't want reflections leaking. So each probe has a sort of an origin point, which you can sort of see. If I grab this one, and I'll just switch off the search so I can actually see these. You've got the origin point, which actually is where it's picking up reflections from in the scenes. You want to use preferably lots of smaller probes that sort of cover near objects. So I've got this one placed in front of this bar here, and that's so it actually picks up the reflections of the bar and sort of shows them off down there. If I actually move this reflection probe around, you'll see that the bar moves with it, so you don't really necessarily want that reflection. So what I've done is I've added a second reflection here, which is actually encompassing the whole thing, but it's got a lower importance, and that sort of picks up from there and illuminates this whole section with that. You will notice that the reflections are not quite fully accurate with the scene. We do have real-time reflections, which are. That said, like shadows, the human brain ignores discrepancies on reflections and shadows to a very large degree, so you can get away with a lot of fudging without it being immediately noticeable. The great thing about using reflection probes is that every surface picks them up, and it picks them up basically for free. You can sort of see even here, like transparent objects that are circular. It's picking up the reflections of the neighboring environment just fine. Every object in the scene will pick up these reflections that are available. Reflection probes can be a little bit expensive, so we've actually got a component in the 10.8 editor packs. Actually, it's 10.7.10 and above, but 10.8 was just released, so it does contain these components. We are baking the reflection probes into this scene right now, which is probably using up a bit of the file size that we don't have to. And that means that we are, while I'm baking them at 512 resolution, we could actually render these at runtime just when the scene loads once, so it's not a huge performance hit. And that would let us have a resolution that could be up to, I think it would go up to 248, which would give us much more crisp reflection. Because when you get a little bit close here, you can see there's a little bit of pixelation around the edges there. Rendering them at a higher resolution will fix that problem. To do that, if you want to use them, you can set the type to custom, and that will cause the reflection probe to not actually update. And then we can use, what's the command? It is reflection probe updater. That's the one we're looking for. And we can just set that to update and load. And if that's the case, this currently is set so it'll update once a second. It's got the target update interval, so it'll actually render in real time once per second. It'll update the reflections. We probably don't really want to do that if we're just doing it once off, so we could just set that to some insanely high value, and that'll be once per year. But as long as you've got the update on load checked, it'll update once at the very start. So I'll just set that back to 1, and that's sort of how you could set this up. Now we can just go back to baked. I've just got my pre-baked one, but just for reference, that's how you can do that. The other bits and pieces we have on our lighting, you can see that we've got both real-time global illumination and mixed baked lighting enabled. That gives us the best of both worlds. It does carry a performance penalty having both enabled, but if you want the sort of the really crisp look we've got in here, it is a good idea to have both of them on. I know I have recommended against that in the past, but for smaller regions, that smaller geographically, like this one, you can get away with the file size and the performance hits, because frankly this scene is tiny. I think it's got a total draw calls, which is one of the more important measures of performance, of about 64, whereas some of our bigger scenes are sort of in the 2000 plus range. So this is quite a lightweight scene. In fact, it probably will run on mobile just fine. Other bits and pieces we've played around in here. We've got a few animated materials and things. So if I go into here, we'll come to that in a second because I've made a couple in advance of this tutorial. For instance, we've got animated materials. That's just doing a shader animation. The region name, we've actually got this scripted. I can show you the quick script. The script is just one line long, which is just changing the text on that to actually be the region name. So when this is sold as a template to end users, you'll actually see your region name there instead of whatever you've got. Okay, so a final thing I guess is to note we've got a lot of objects with either baked or real-time global illumination coming off the materials. You can set that all up. I'll just try and find something with real-time. I think these guys are real-time. Yes, they are. One of the things when you've got pre-computed lighting enabled, you can actually play with these values and see them impact on the whole area at once. So if I set that to 20, you'll see that it actually blasts out the whole scene, and that can be an interesting look too, but not the one we're going for. And likewise, if we set that to 0, then it'll darken the scene down. You can see that sort of updates the material as well. And I'll just set that back to 2. There we go. So this is our basic scene. Now, I have also prepared, as part of this tutorial, a custom shader, which we're going to use as part of our visualization animations. And I will get to visualization, but I do want to cover some of the more basic elements of audio before we get up to the things. But I can show you just a little bit of what we'll be getting to. So if I set this one to here, you can sort of see we've actually got a shader that warps this vine and has a little animated path and things coming off it. So there's a few things we'll play with that one later, but we'll set up to let's sort of see. We're going to use this as part of our visualizer. So I'll just set that off to 0, and that will go away. So those are our key elements. But first, I want to get on to audio. So I have helpfully grabbed a whole bunch of audio files, which hopefully I have dropped into the right directory. What was it? GDI. You'll have to forgive me. I have actually not dropped these guys onto the right folder. So let's grab Adam. This might take a second to import, but I've just grabbed these off Audio Blocks, which is an audio resource site. So I apologise that this is a little bit music-y, but it will hopefully be useful for testing out what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so audio and Unity. This is going to take a second to import, so I'm just going to cover off the basics while this does import. Unity has a fairly sophisticated audio pipeline, particularly in 5.0 we got a major update to it, letting us define custom mixers and all sorts of things. But even beforehand, it's had quite a strong audio pipeline for a couple of years, letting you do things like reverbs, distortion effects, high pass and low pass, all those sort of common audio effects. And what we can actually do is we can vary them based on distance in the scene. So, for instance, we can have what we're going to do here is we're going to have the music that's playing inside the region. We're going to have that be a bit low passed when you get outside the front door. So there's a few ways we can do that, but we'll get into the basics first. So to do that, we've got our music in here. I'm just going to grab one of these, and I'm hoping that you guys will be able to hear this. OBS is set to record, but I'm just going to watch it quickly just to make sure that it does actually. Yep. Okay, so we do have music available there. Now, to bringing audio into the scene, you can either create an object that's got an audio source on it. So like this, you just drag the clip into the audio clip, and there we are, we've got a audio source. And what you can see is you'll see two circles, a big one and a small one. And the big one, this covers sort of these roll-off values, so if we set it to a linear roll-off, I don't know where the big one is, was it really tiny? No, it's set to 500, that's why. So you can see here we go, the big one and the small one. So the big one defines the maximum radius at which something could be heard. The small one defines the minimum radius at which something can be heard. Now, by default, Unity switches two things on that you probably will want to change when you're doing immersive sound. The first is the Spatial Blend. This indicates whether the sound is coming from globally, that is to say it's got no particular source in the scene, or if it comes from a particular point in the scene. Now, it's a slider, you can make something 50-50, but usually you want to use one or the other. So 2D it's entirely located on the user's computer, and they don't have a particular source inside the environment. This also means that the 3D sound distance settings, things won't work. But if you've got a 3D, then it will actually be available. And you can see the listener there is the distance to the camera. When you've got a camera in the scene, you can see how far away it is. Or if you don't have a camera in the scene, it'll use the position of the scene view. The other thing we want to change by default is probably the Doppler level. Doppler effects basically occur on moving vehicles. When something moves towards you, it raises in pitch. When it moves away from you, it lowers in pitch. In this case, it can be annoying because it can be triggered by the camera moving around, those kinds of things. It sort of cause a bit of warping and distortion. On music and things, you don't want it. On things like car motors, you do want it. Really depends what you're going for, but for the most part, those are the two settings we're probably going to play with the most that we're just going to switch straight off. So we're going to switch the Doppler off to 0, and we're going to set the Spatial Blend up to 3D. Now, the other thing I'll do is I'll just loop this one, and we've got Play on Awake. So when Play on Awake is ticked, it'll play without needing to be told to play by a script or something else. So here we've got this one. It's quite a small thing. Now I don't have I'll just bring a player char into here. Hopefully this behaves. It's alright. I forgot to warm up my Unity again. I did this last week as well. It does take a second to hit play the very first time you do it on a day's session. Here we go. And in hindsight, I probably should have tested a few other things. Okay, we've got a few other special bits and pieces in here that I'll switch back off. Okay. So, the animation's on the character. Basics of audio clips. I'll just disable that particle system again because we will get to this one. There's something planned for that. I have prepped a few things for today. So that's the basics of setting up audio. Nothing particularly special. What we can do though is start adding components to it. So the first thing we might want to do is, in fact, what we'll do is we'll set the audio to be audible outside the club. So what we'll do is we'll move this guy over here a little bit. We'll raise up some of the distances so I can play with them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the... Now you can actually add keyframes to this as well. If you want to make something sound particularly louder when you get through a particular point, we can do stuff like this. And that way, where we see the distance between those, it'll actually have a fairly sharp reduction at that point. So that means that the entrance to the environment will have a sort of a more muted entryway. Let's grab him. So that's the first thing we can do. The second thing I want to play with is audio reverb zones. So these can be placed into an environment to give a particular effect in an area. So say you make a sewer, you want to make it sound like a sewer. What you do is just add an audio reverb zone. It's up in game objects, so game object audio reverb zone. And this guy is positioned similar to the other one, except what it does is it applies an effect on audio as you play it. So I'm just going to... This one's in here, and we'll make this something quite obvious. I think that drugged preset is quite obvious that it's on and off. So hopefully we can actually hear this. So you can sort of now hear that this reverb's on. All these kinds of things, or you can just customize it directly. That's first type of audio effect you can do. The reverb zones are convenient because you can place them just once. You don't need to update every single audio clip that's going to be affected by them. The more complicated effects can be added directly onto the objects though. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a a low-pass filter. So imagine that we've got the audio coming through a heavy door. Usually when you've got that kind of thing, only the very low frequencies will actually pass through. And to simulate that, you just use a low pass. So go low pass, audio low pass filter. And you'll see it actually adds a new bar here as well. So you can see that the cutoff frequency, this defines the range at which the frequencies are cut off. So everything above 5,000 hertz here is going to be cut. For reference, human speech sort of sits there in the 400 to 1200, well 200 to 1200 radius, typically in the 400 to 800. So that's still quite high. What we can do is also preview this without needing to hit play each time. And to do that, you just use the audio preview here, and it'll use the scene position as the camera. Now, for the audio low pass, if we set it to quite low, let's set it down to 200, we should only hear the bass tones. See? So we've missed all the upper bits. So when you've got it behind a wall, it might sound closer to that. Maybe a bit heavier than that, so it's 200. Now what we might want to do is make it so that you hear the full thing when you're close, but far away, like here. We want it quite bassy. To do that, we just passes, and as we move closer, we'll see the listener. So that's the second type of effect. And I will probably not demo every single one of them because I think that'll probably waste a lot of time. But you can see that they're under the audio category. So I can give you the basics of what they do. Reverb zone adds the one we already talked about that adds sort of various environmental effects to an area. That can be applied to a game object and doesn't have to be applied to an audio source. The low pass lets low frequencies pass. High pass is the inverse, that it blocks low frequencies and lets the higher ones through, so it's the opposite effect. An echo filter, that's fairly obvious, it just adds as a chorus echo to just an echo to the audio as it comes out. The distortion filter, this acts basically like a compressor. So it will actually make the volume louder, but it will also compress the hell out of your stream. So be a little bit careful unless what you're going for is things like robotic sounding voices, that kind of thing. You may want to consider using a distortion filter. Reverb filter, similar to the reverb zone, just lets you apply it on a single audio thing. Finally, the last ones that you may want to play with is the chorus filter, and that will give you the sort of the basics of setting up audio this way. Now, there is one more thing which we have not covered, and I'm only going to get a little bit of time to sort of get through into this one, because I'm a little bit conscious of time, and that is audio mixers. Now, we supply an audio mixer ourselves, which you can use as your output zone. So when you click output, you can actually specify a particular mixer, and this actually goes into our user interface. So the sliders that you control in our settings window are actually adjusting these ones here. So you can see we've actually got a master mixer, which is the set of a total output, user interface, which is for sound effects and things. Please don't put things in here unless it is actually user interface. Music, which covers sort of music streams and that kind of thing. Voice over IP, this covers voice chat. Not all kinds of voice chat will go through here. If you're using Vivox in your scenes, then Vivox actually runs through an entirely separate audio subsystem where you don't route it back into the audio mixer. Sound effects, this is where most sound effects that you place into a scene will get routed into. So if you don't specify an output, then it'll go into there. And then ambient noise is another one that's sort of a group of sound effects used for things like birds and ocean waves and that kind of thing. Again, if you don't specifically have a use case for messing with these, just leave it blank and we'll pick one for you when your scene is loaded. When you set up an audio mixer group, if you take a look at our one, it's fairly basic. What is it called? There we go. So just find that one. You can actually see in the audio mixer here, we can open this guy up, and you can see all of our things. We actually have things like, for instance, when there's interface music, it'll duck, which is sort of mute the volume of other items when it's going on. So you can sort of see here that the interface is set as duck source, so when there's a click or something like that, it'll actually duck interface music, which is something that you guys haven't seen yet because it's part of one of our future updates, but it's part of the welcome experience that people get a little bit of a jingle and things as they register their avatars. But what we can do is we can set up a whole bunch of things here on effects and things, so you can actually make your own mixes if you want to and use your own mixes. Just be a little bit careful on how you behave with it, because you can sort of really make messed up audio signals, but you've got a whole bunch of things here. You can play with everything from normalization to adding additional effects that you couldn't off just the audio clip. Used with care, but can be useful. Okay, so we covered off the basics of audio now, and actually I want to get into the interesting stuff today, which is all about visualization and what we can do with our music visualization components. So when you create an object here, we've got all of our components. The ones you want to look for today are audio reactive. Caps lock key on. So you've got a bunch here. There's animation, light, material, particle system, and transform. Now, particle system shouldn't be there. That's part of my editor pack and shouldn't be in yours because it's a new one. But the ones we're going to play with today mostly are going to be the light, material, and animation ones, as well as transform, I guess, to a lesser degree. So we'll start with transform because it's the easiest one. So this reads off your output volume every frame, and based on the spectrum information, it'll let you play around with how an object reacts in world. So what we could do is we're going to make a dancing cube. That's going to be our first step. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a new cube. Let's move it to my camera. Okay, there's nothing special about this cube, except it's going to dance. So we're going to set audio reactive transform. Now transform refers to this transform component up here, which is the position, rotation, and scale. So this one, you can see a whole bunch of options to start with. We've got a couple of different modes and a few different different settings. So I'm just going to walk through these once because they're the same for every type of audio reactive component for the most part. There's a few modifications towards the bottom, but the top part's the same. So the first is the band. Now the band indicates which band of the spectrum we're reading. So we break up the spectrum, the human audio spectrum, which runs from about 0 to 20,000 hertz. Sorry, 22,000 hertz. And we break this up into 12 roughly evenly spaced bands. So it runs from 0, which is bass, up to 12, which is the upper treble. And what you can do is you can actually filter what this is going to read and react to. But first we're going to set it to actually react to something so we can preview and play with this in the environment. So the first thing we do is we're going to make it so it actually updates the position. Now the position is currently minus 2 point whatever, so we're just going to set the min position to that. We're going to set the max position to, I don't know, how high can we go? We'll go to minus 0.8. Minus 0.8, so that's actually lower than that, so it'll go up and down. So this is now set to read across all spectrums, and it should give you the basics. Now when we play with this, it's probably not going to animate very much, and I'll get to that in a second, which is to do with these value parameters. We'll edit these as live as we go. Just wait a second. So that's actually should be 53. We'll just paste the same values in both. Okay. And I do have other music tracks which I will switch to in a second when we get tired of this one, because when you hear the same track over and over again, it can drive you a little bit up the wall. Now this will work with all streaming audio components with lots of shout So the next ones we want to play with are the limit increase and limit decrease. So these actually indicate the speed of how quickly it can move up and down between 0 and max value. So if it's set to 1 there, that's going to say that the over 1 second it can move from the one extreme to the other, which is probably quite slow. So it reduces that. I mean, it's going to be quite slow. Interesting as it is not really terribly useful. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove him, and we're going to add a light source, and we can do exactly the same stuff with lights. What I might do is I might make this an interesting light. So I'm going to first get my light looking the way I want it. Set this up to some insane value. Okay. Yep, this will do. So this is how it's going to look when it's sort of running. Nah, that's probably fine. And I'll just give it some shadows as well, just for the hell of it. Now you can mix and match these components as well, so we could actually animate the light using the transform components and have an audio reactive light on the same object, so if it wants to sort of dance around or something like that, you could do it. So I'll just have the audio reactive light. And we'll have this one show up sort of on these mid-tones. I think we worked out they're about 0.3. We'll set that to 0.1. We'll set these guys up to 5. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to animate the intensity. I'm going to set the intensity from default to 0. I'm going to set the intensity max to 1.5, and that's probably going to blow out completely. You can animate all these properties though individually. So first things first, just save this. As you can see, our region name has been changed to unknown, as it's happened in the offline preview. But some tracks are going to be better than others. So if I grab I've got a Latin track in here, which is going to be completely different. Where's my audio source? There we go. Let's grab this guy. Click play. you'll notice that the volume is probably going to be lower, the frequency bands and things that it impacts. I've found every genre of music generally has its own sort of best practice as far as setup goes. So if you're building a rock club, you'll probably want to calibrate against rock tracks. Don't sort of tune the frequencies and things based on touching the frequencies at all. We do very briefly. So we do need to be a little bit careful about how we set these things up, because when you play certain genres of music and things, they won't give you the right response, so your club won't work well. What you could do is consider having multiple batches of moving on, the final one we want to play with is animation, and animation gives you control over everything. This is the one that sort of gives you the ability to, as we've discussed on previous sessions, you can animate anything and everything in Unity, which is fantastic, but also means that you've got the ability to tie that to an audio source. So what we can do here is we can create a new one, and this is where we're going to start playing with some of the components, the shaders I made. So this shader, if I pull it up in Visual Studio, this one, and I'll scan through if people want to pause and look at the code. It's not terribly complicated. This is my L-wire shader that's a little bit crazier. This bit here is where the actual animation comes in on this object. That said, I didn't do anything special in building this. This was not some work of art designed to look like right from the beginning. I just kept loading more variables onto this until I got an effect that I thought looked cool. And you can test that out by making sure animated materials is on, and this one I can just sort of start playing with these things. So the effect I'm looking for is going to be a bit insane, hopefully. Let's play with, it's probably a bit too much. 1.5 perhaps. So as we've got crazy music going on here, I want to make this stuff sort of explode and look interesting. Set that to 2. We'll just try to tweak these values a little bit until I get the look I'm looking for. So there we go. Now we've got a sort of a weird shaped thing. Now this looked better with the post applied. So if I sort of add my camera back that I was using before, I'll just add my post component. I'll just add the profile I made for this region, which is this one, just so we can see that this is how it's going to look in practice. Now this guy, fairly straightforward, but the key thing is we can just start playing with the animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to record 2 animations for this one. We're going to blend between them. So that's something we didn't cover last week, but you can actually get multiple animations and blend between those animations. So what we're going to do is we'll create one animation on this one, and this one's going to be off. So I'm just going to set this one. The vertex stretch is the one I'm really playing with here to turn this off and on. So I'm just going to set this one. I'm going to create a new animation, and this is going to be my L-wire. Oops. L-wire. Idle. We might even dim the emission color down in here. So the first thing we're just going to record this. I'm going to dim this down to, this is currently brightness 2. I've got that value taken, so I'll set this down to 1. So this is going to be a bit dimmer. And there's no vertex stretch, I'll just set that to 0. Okay, so it's interesting, but not terribly basic. That's our first animation. So the next one, we're going to create a new clip. We're going to create a second animation. It's going to be called L-wire nuts. And when this is set, we're going to set this back up to, I think it was 3.43, and we'll just make sure this is up to 2. Okay. So we now have 2 animations recorded. And with a little luck, we can see that. Oops, this is my idle, and this is my nuts, and I'll just make sure that it's actually recording because it hasn't. You've got to make sure that little record button is ticked if you actually make these changes apply to the object. So I'll set that to 3. 2, and you will be 3.43. Okay, now we're done. So we've got idle. Our idle should be play, it'll just be basic, and it'll go to our nuts, and it'll be a bit more crazy. So I'll just take that off, and I'll just set the material back to how it should be, so that should be 0. Okay, so we've got our 2 clips. The next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to make an animated controller that blends between them. So just create an animated controller, and I'm going to call this my L-wire. Okay, and we're going to bring up the animator. First thing we're going to do is going to create a blend tree. Now, blend tree is a special type of thing which covers sort of blending between multiple animations. You can do all sorts of complex blends here, 2D, 3D, all kinds of blends. We're just going to use a simple 1D blend, which is blending between 2 animations on a point. So what I'll do is I'll first add 2 animations to it. I'll add 2 motion fields. I'll just drag and drop those ones in here. So this was L-wire idle, that'll be our 0, and our L-wire nuts as our 1. So this is fairly basic. As we blend between these, it'll sort of switch between what percentage of the animation is coming from what. So in this case, it's going to blend between those variables. Now you could add additional animation layers onto here, so you could actually make that, instead of a 1-frame animation, you can make that a 10-frame animation or whatever you like, and it'll blend between the whole lot as it goes. But this will do for the basics. Now the next thing we need to do is add the parameters. So the parameter for this is always called audio, capital A audio, and it's just a float parameter. And that one is used by our audio reactive. It'll just pipe into there. So I'm just going to set the blend parameter, which I believe I can do off here. Yep. So I click the parameter. I'm just going to set that to audio. And it's going to play off the audio layer now. Okay, so that's that thing done. So I'm just going to go back to my scene. I'm going to find my thing, and we are going to add our audio. Add our controller here, so I'll look for our wire controller, just put that on the animator. Okay, now it's going to feed based on the input values into here, what goes in here. Now the next thing we're just going to do is going to add an audio reactive animator, audio reactive animation even, and that feeds into that animator. So we'll just do this off the mid pitches, and we want this to only show up on big beats. So we'll set this to 0.03, I think was where we were getting those responses for 4. We'll just set that to there, and I'll set the rest. Okay, so now we've got sort of the basics of our animation in place. So what I'll do finally on this, I'm going to change my track back, just so I've got the one that's more predictable. We know the values for it. It was midnight. There we go. Okay, save and hit play. And I left my camera in the scene. One sec. Where's that camera? Thank you. This is a new feature in the point editor pack, is actually when you've got nothing in the scene, it will add a player character wherever you've got a landmark in the scene. Just a little bit of a convenience feature, but it makes things a bit easier. You don't need to keep dragging that player char into the scene. So there we go. This way was a little bit more complicated to set up, but it lets you use the full animator. Now, if you don't want to use the full animator, you just want to blend between 2 materials that are similar, what we could do is we could take this one. I'm just going to duplicate it 2 times, and you'll know why in a second. We'll go 5A, and we're going to create a 5B. So 5A and 5B. This one's going to have our 3 stretch, and we're going to change the color as well, just so we've got a bit more of a interesting blend. So it's going to go between that and that as it goes. Now, to set this one up, we just change our components around. So I'm just going to remove the animator and the animations. So now this is not going to animate at all. We're going to add audio rect. In fact, we don't even need to do this on this object. So we'll just create a new object, empty game object. Doesn't matter where it is. And we'll call it audio material, audio reactive material. There we go. So this one has 2 properties for an origin and an original and a target. So that's sort of what it blends from and to. And then finally we can set the target material, which is this one, which is currently being used on here and these guys as well. So a similar process, we're just going to set the bands. I'll set to 0.03. Actually, set it to 8. Okay, let's have a look at this looks like. Set this guy up. One thing to note, this will actually modify your materials, so just be aware that if you're not a fan of them, it will reset them automatically when it starts back up, but it will modify them. So what I'll do is I'll just copy you. Can I even copy the settings? I'm going to try that before. No. Okay. We'll just copy these guys back. We'll probably no point doing this because it's about to get reset 20 times over, but just for nicety's sake. Oh wait, no, it's reset. No, go figure. Okay, alright. Final thing, setting up this canvas. So I've set up a particle system in here already, which I switched off before. I'm going to show you this too. Now this particle system, I can show you the basics of how it's set up. It's kind of basic. It looks better with the post effects applied, so I'll just reapply that just so we can get that. So when we look at our particle system, you can see that it's kind of a pretty effect that sort of just bounces up through the scene. Now this is using a few things. First, it's using that same shader I built for the L wire there. You can see that on the actual renderer material. So we've got 2 things on here. We've got a trail renderer, which is rendering these lines behind it, which is using a normal particle shader, and then we've got the L wire shader, which actually sort of warps things around. And we're using that with a mesh particle, so we're actually spawning meshes as particles instead of just 2D things. If we did a sphere, for instance, we can see something completely different and interesting. But this is actually, I don't know, that looks actually kind of nice, so I might go with this one instead of the one I had before. It's a little bit weird, but that's what we're all about today. So we're going to make it so that the DJ up in this booth up here can spawn an array of these whenever they like. So they can push a button and have it spawn an array. To do this, it's relatively straightforward. The first thing we do is we could do this either through a canvas, which we discussed last week, or through a button. I'm just going to use a button here for today because it's simpler. So to do that, we just create a cube. I'm going to use this as my button. It's a little bit basic, but there we go. Make it a little bit smaller. And now this one's going to have a clickable activator. I'm just going to tick this networked box, and that means it'll run on every machine rather than it'll run on the server rather than run on the client. And we'll just do an on-click effect. So the first thing we're going to do is the particle system. This is currently set to spawn over time. You can see the emission there. It's set to emit 100 particles a second. So we're going to set that down to 0, and that's going to stop it from emitting. And we're just going to grab this box, drop my particle system into the on-click event. I'm going to go particles, and I'm going to do emit. I'm going to emit a whole second's worth all at once, so 100. And that is pretty straightforward. So the click activator, we'll call this Okay, this should be, I'll delete my camera, good to go. So what happens is, while you've got the music playing, you can have your DJs have a whole array of buttons and things that will give them sort of control over how things look. It's a bit quiet, but now I've got our magic box, and we've got a nice camera position, and we can hit go. And every time they push that, it'll spawn another batch, so you can spawn a whole bunch of row for a completely nuts effect. So all your viewers will be able to see while they're in their region. So that almost covers everything. There's probably one last thing I want to do to this region, just very quickly, since I've got 11 minutes left before I'm going to start my office hours. And that is, we're going to set these buttons. Because I talked about before how we got the Illumination scene, it'd be really cool to actually see that. We did it before, we modified that material. This one, what we're going to do is actually make the whole room light up in a rainbow. And to do that, we're just going to copy this material 7 times. I don't think there's 7 up there, is there? No, we have less than 7. We have 6. 6 it is. It's going to give you a slightly condensed rainbow. So I'm just going to grab the material on this one, the light white blue, and I'm just going to move this into another directory. My music directory will do. Don't follow my advice here. I'm just going to create this one as light red. I'm going to need to make a couple of variations of this one, so we'll take a minute. Red, orange, yellow. Green. Indigo and violet are going to get compressed into one. Okay. So that's our 6 base colours, and we're also going to just add an A and B on each of these, but I'm just going to first get them the right colours. So yellow, I'm going to set the albedo on all these down to pretty much 0, to black, because I don't have time to add them onto there. Next thing, we'll just set this is yellow. There we go, yellow. Set it to red. Orange. Now I'm going to cheat here a little bit and make this one easier, so I'm just going to set it to blue. Okay. So we've got our basic colours in there, and I'm just going to duplicate them all once. And because they're all coming from one colour to another, which will be black, I'm just going to turn the basic one is going to be light black. And this is going to be our source on our material thing. So I'm just going to go here and set the colour down to 0. Okay. So this is going to be how they all look by default. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set these guys up. I'm going to set this to, you're going to get blue. Actually, hang on. Let me do this in order so I don't lose my place. So red, orange, oops, green, blue, indigo, and that's going to mean that we're going to lose our violet, but we've got one in there already. Okay, so that's our rainbow top. Now we just add a component, create an MG object with our audio reactive material. We're just going to cut and paste this a bunch of times too. So I'm just going to set the target material on this one is going to be, we'll start with blue. This is the top, original material here. Sorry, the original material is going to be black, sorry, not blue. And that's just where it's going to read the source values from. The destination is going to be the target, and our copy is going to go in the target there. Okay, and here we're just going to set the set the bands evenly. So there's 12 in total, so each is going to cover 2. And that means that we've got a nice even covering. It might be a little bit back to front on which ones light up when. I could do this a little bit more precisely, but I've got 3 minutes now, so I'm just going to cut and paste this very quickly. Okay, now max value is 0.5, or set it to 0.2. Okay. You are going to be ARM 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This one, we'll just set this quickly. This to 4 and 2. You're getting green. Swapping green in there. We'll set green 1 to there. And move on to the next one. 6 and 4. We'll set this one to indigo. And indigo. Copy that goes there. We'll just take half a second. This was 8. 6 and 8. What was this? Indigo's last one's orange. So orange into there. Copy into there. Okay, moving on. 8 and 10. This is red, I believe. So let's put red into there, and red into there. And finally, our last one. Now, some of these are going to be more likely to show up. Some of these really high pitches are probably not going to show up terribly often. Fine, we'll just drop our yellows. And our yellow copy. And now, if we've done that right, this hopefully will look rather impressive. If we haven't done it right, it'll all blow up, but we're right out of time, so hopefully it does work.